dive into some of the strategies to address congestion within the region. And so if you go to that link, solvethistogether.org, conversations, then you'll have a opportunity to sign up for one of those small group discussions in the coming weeks. Another item that we've distributed in the packet was a policy brief on congestion. And so a lot of the material that we presented at the workshop can be found within this policy brief. I think it breaks down not only the causes of traffic congestion and provides a better understanding of those, but also some documentation of what those existing congestion trends are in the region and how they are forecasted to change in the future. And it also identifies some of those, not only identifying some of those congestion problems, but starting to identify what are some potential strategies that are available to address those needs. One thing that we've also done is a lot of the data that you see available either through the workshop or that's housed within the policy brief. We're trying to put that within the data portal as well so that you all have an opportunity to explore it on your own. And so this link takes you to the data portal where we have a congestion management app that you can have the opportunity to look at some of those congestion measures in current year, also out into 2035, 2045, and look at it across the different measures that we use, such as free flow or level of service, and then also overlay it with some of the facilities or activity generators within the region where congestion may be more likely to occur. And then a couple other items that we're preparing, so largely related to step 4, the data collection and monitoring plan. We've in monthly meetings with FHWA, TDOT, and WEGO, we've discussed a lot of data to monitor and analyze the system with, and looking at that data on how we're going to apply it based on the timing or the geography that it's best used at. And so we've been documenting that in a memo that will capture some of those ongoing data collection and monitoring plan details. And so items will capture kind of an overview of what those data sources are, some of the partner roles and responsibilities in preparing that data, some of the time frames or frequencies at which the data is updated, and then the detailed components of that data within the inventory. And we'll post that as well at the CMP file share. And then one other item that is currently under development and that we'll post on the CMP file share is the Toolbox of Strategies. And so we've also worked with partners to expand the inventory of potential strategies to mitigate congestion, often referred to as the CMP Toolbox. And these are strategies that we can consider when seeking opportunities to mitigate some of these traffic congestion problems within the region. So similarly, this memo will detail kind of an overview of what those strategies are, some of the roles and responsibilities, and who's implementing or primarily responsible for implementing those strategies, and then documenting kind of the details on those strategies within the toolbox, such as the common challenges or potential impact, cost, and timeline of those. And so once again, we'll make you aware as soon as we post those on the CMP file share, but that's another opportunity to review those as we finish them up. Any questions on that before we dive into the safety presentation? All right, we'll keep going. Similar to the material that we covered for the workshop on congestion, we're going to give you kind of a overview of some of the safety trends and conditions within the region. Ashley's going to dig into a lot of those trends, but I'll just get us started just with a little bit of a background. Why this topic matters. I think this one is a little bit more self-explanatory than the congestion, but most importantly, just the impacts of safety, and most immediate is the loss of life. So in the region, I think there's nearly 200 people that die each year from crashes on the region's transportation system. There's also the health impacts associated with those crashes that result in serious injuries, impacting folks' health and well-being and quality of life. Also has an economic impact as well. Some of this reports that we've looked at, the CDC estimates that Tennessee as a state loses over $1 billion annually due to crash-related deaths, and estimates that the economic cost of those crashes is over $160 million each year for the state. And then also just unsafe conditions can really minimize or constrain access to opportunities, discourage certain trips from happening, or prevent folks from that don't have access to an automobile from taking trips that might be unsafe. And then we also have a number of federal requirements related to safety that we update or on an annual basis, or through the regional transportation plan cycle. And so most of you are familiar with the national goal to achieve a significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries on public roads. And then the MPO participates in a number of ongoing efforts. One is the state's development of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which is currently underway. And then you all have participated each year in the update of safety performance measure targets for the 5 measures that you see here. And then some of the upcoming additional requirements related to safety will be when we dig into the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan and some of the performance measure target setting associated with those requirements. So we're also documenting this in a policy brief that we will present to you, but today will be kind of a preview of what that looks like, not only going through kind of what the causes of crashes and safety issues are in the region, but documenting a lot of that data and the trends across the region. And that will identify not only where some of the high crash locations are within the region and where we should be focusing some of our efforts, but also hopefully guide us towards shared strategies and actions through the plan process. Some of the key issues and challenges, just as we frame safety, is poor walkability and pedestrian safety within the region. We're aware of the sidewalk network is pretty limited throughout the region and sometimes disconnected, which can create unsafe conditions for pedestrians using the system. Also, the rapid growth and development, as that continues throughout the region, there's more people, more trips on a daily basis. Increasing potential opportunities for conflict between users of the system. I think on top of the limited transportation options and that growth and development is that there are these limited opportunities to travel within the region, and personal automobile leads to more cars on the road and opportunities for those conflicts. And also that the environments become increasingly complex as there's more micromobility and ride-sharing opportunities. In addition, we've got growth and development, and a lot of construction and work zones within the area, which it makes it a little bit more challenging to maintain a safe transportation system. So just framing some of the risk factors that we'll dive into through this presentation. Crashes can be attributed to multiple risk factors. Some of those that we've identified are, built environment or infrastructure related, as well as behavior related, so drivers, pedestrians, particular age groups, and then also looking into weather and some of the other external factors that may influence and impact safety within the region. I'll just touch on a few of the more built environment related, and so looking at interchanges, one of the locations where vehicles often have to merge or interact with one another, and oftentimes is another area which is common site of crashes throughout the region. There's approximately 100 interchanges within the system, and as we go through the maps, you'll see where there tends to be a prevalence of crashes at them. Similarly, intersections, another planned point of conflict in the roadway system. Approximately 1/3 of the crashes within the region occur at intersections, and have over 37,000 intersections within the region. Approximately, this map shows the density of those intersections, and about 3,300 or more than 3,300 of those are signalized intersections as well. And one other dimension would be the at-grade crossings. Although crashes are tend to be not that common at grade rail crossings, when they do occur, they do have a high potential to result in a serious injury or fatality. And so there's more than 700 at-grade rail crossings across the MPO region, and only about 20% of those rail crossings are gated. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Ashley, and she's going to take you through some of the regional trends that we've looked at, examining kind of crashes by severity, frequency, looking at crashes by mode, as well as the type of collisions, and then also digging into the crashes by some of the emphasis areas that we've highlighted. And so I'll let Ashley take it away.
All right, awesome. So right here we have total crashes over the course of 2015 to 2019. We have it for the state up in orange, and we have it for the MPO in navy blue. You can see that the trend stays fairly consistent from 2015 to 2019. I want to note that the MPO region has about 25% of the state's population, but yet makes up about 30% of the state's crashes each year. Here, the next slide. Here we have crash locations from 2015 to 2019. We had over 300,000 crashes. 1 point on this map equals 1 crash. Although these aren't recurring, there were about 197 crashes per day over the last 5 years. Next slide, please. This is just another way of looking at that previous slide. This shows the geographic distribution of crashes. You can see that they're really concentrated along major interstates, corridors, and interchanges. Next slide. Here we have fatalities over the course of 2015 to 2019. Again, the state in orange and the MPO in navy blue. The MPO region accounts for roughly 20% of the state's total fatalities. We have a similar trend to the state, and we're currently increasing. Next slide. Here, this map shows the more random geographic distribution of fatal crashes. I do want to note that it does say 943 total fatal crashes, while there were 1,001 total fatalities, so people. I do want to note too, over the last 5 years, we have lost a life every other day due to traffic accidents. Accidents that are typically more fatal are ones that involved an impaired driver, head-on collisions, or non-motorists, so pedestrians and bicyclists, as well as motorcycles. And not only are lives lost, but there's also the inefficiency of the roadway capacity due to lane closures due to these accidents. Next slide. Here we see a graph of fatality rates for the United States in light blue, the MPO in dark blue, and the state of Tennessee in orange. The nation and the state are trending downward, and unfortunately, we're trending upwards. And I do want to bring back the congestion forecast from the last workshop where it shows an increase in VMT, and this could lead to a higher rate in the future. Next slide. Here's just another way of looking at it. It's looking at the region county by county. You can see that the Nashville region's MPO over the last 5 years had 0.92 fatalities for every 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And this allows you to see certain counties are higher than the region, the state, and the nation. Next slide. Here we have the annual totals for serious injuries. I do want to note the sharp decline between 2017 and 2018. We have mentioned it before that that is likely due to the change in definition. And the MPO roughly accounts for 20% of the state's serious injuries, and we have both been trending downward. Next slide. Here we have the geographic distribution of serious injury crashes. You can see that they're along major corridors, principal arterials, and along the inner loop. We have a little under 4 crashes that result in a serious injury per day. Typically, crashes that result in a serious injury can lead to at least one lane closure, and that can oftentimes lead to congestion as well. Next slide. Here we're looking at serious injury numbers for the MPO versus the serious injury rates for the MPO. You'll notice on the left-hand side you have number of serious injuries, and that corresponds with the light blue line. And on the right-hand side we have serious injury rate, which is corresponding with the gray line. Both of these, the rates and the numbers, have been trending downwards. Can you go to the next slide? Here again, and we're comparing each county and being able to compare them amongst the region as well as the state. And you can see for the Nashville MPO, we had 6.39 serious injuries on average from 2015 to 2019 per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. And here we had the annual totals for non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. I want to quickly note that we are missing that value for 2019 from the state. I unfortunately wasn't able to get that from Patrick and his team prior to this meeting. But I do want to note that the state is dropping significantly and the MPO is remaining fairly consistent. Next slide. Now we're going to get into the geographic distribution by mode a little bit more so. Here's the map for pedestrian crashes. You can see that they are largely concentrated in urban centers, downtown and the west end of downtown Nashville. And we have a little less than 2 pedestrian involved crashes per day. Next
Ashley?
Slide. Yes.
This is Tom Brashear. Can you go back to I've been interested in the 2 slides that break things down by county. And I noticed that Williamson County has a fairly low average as opposed to Maury County that has a high figure. And the same thing can kind of be said for Wilson County, but more specifically, I think the better example is Williamson to Maury. Is that a result of heightened travel speeds due to congestion actually spreading out a little bit along I-65?
It could, but it's also probably largely due to vehicle miles traveled. And so there are less vehicle miles traveled in the county of Murray. So those serious injuries or those fatalities are going to carry more weight.
Okay. Well, just know, I guess, I need some better explanation. Those 2, this actual graph and the last one that you had that showed county data doesn't make sense to me in relation to what you're showing elsewhere for the state and regional data. They seem to be flying opposite to what you're showing on the other slides. So I need better explanation of that, and I'll mute myself again. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. And we'll get into that towards the end of this presentation as well. We look into individual county by county profiles in order to try to get at those trends specifically for those counties. So I'm glad you brought that up. So here we have bike crashes where we see a similar trend to pedestrians, but we have it more concentrated downtown. This could be where we have a lot of cars and a lot of people, but a lack of proper facilities. We have about 150 bike-related crashes every year. Next slide. Here we're showing the geographic distribution of truck crashes. You'll notice that interstates and principal arterials are significantly highlighted, and especially I-65 north through downtown to I-24 east being the heaviest. We have a little over 6 truck crashes per day. Next slide. And here we're looking at motorcycle crashes. You can see they're a little bit more widely dispersed. We have about 2 crashes per day involving a motorcycle. These are typically much more severe, and I did find it interesting when I was looking at motorcycle crashes by vehicle miles traveled. It really starts to highlight the 31 corridor down in Murray County, just because there are a lot of motorcycle crashes occurring and not a lot of vehicle miles traveled. So it's showing the disproportionately high motorcycle crashes along those areas. Next slide. Here we start to look at crashes by severity by mode. And when you start to move into serious injuries and fatalities, you see that pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists make up a larger share of the more severe crashes. This is likely due to non-motorist and motorcycles not having protection, or trucks because of their sheer size. They cause a lot more damage. And you'll notice that passenger vehicles make up the largest percentage across all severities, but that's because we have a lot more passenger vehicles on the roadways. Next slide. Here we start looking at crashes by collision type, so rear ends, angled collisions, side swipes, head-on collisions. This shows that year to year they remain fairly consistent, and that rear ends obviously make up a larger percentage of the crashes in the region. Next slide. Here we have the geographic distribution of rear end crashes. These make up about 1/3 of the crashes in the region. They're way more frequent, less severe, typically only result in property damage. They typically occur near intersections. Next slide. And here kind of we have the opposite. We have head-on collisions where they tend to be less frequent, but far more severe. They make up 2% of the crashes in the region. Next slide. Can I get the next slide? I don't know if it's frozen. There it is. Here we have speeding crashes. These typically are more fatal, and you can see in this map that I-24 East is a major hotspot, and that speeding crashes account for 4% of all crashes in the region. Next slide. This is showing the distribution of severity of crashes, and I want to note that for the most part, rear ends, angled crashes, side swipes, and head-on collisions account for the largest percentage of serious injuries and fatalities. So that's why we've highlighted these 4. What I really want to highlight from this is that head-on collisions only accounted for 2% of the crashes in the region, yet they account for 10% of the fatalities. Next slide. Here we're going to look at the trends for crashes by emphasis area, and the emphasis areas that we included were senior drivers, so those drivers over the age of 65, young drivers ages 15 to 24, distracted drivers, and impaired drivers. And I do want to note that in a single crash, you can have multiple of these emphasis areas. So you can have a young distracted driver hitting an impaired senior driver, or any combination of those. And you can see that young drivers make up the largest number of crashes. Next slide. Here we have the geographic distribution of senior involved crashes. These typically occur during daytime hours, and when you start looking closely, you notice that oftentimes these occur near medical offices or medical centers, and these account for 14% of all crashes. Next slide. Again, we have young drivers. This is pretty much more widespread. They occur around universities like Vanderbilt, TSU, NTSU, and they account for about 1/3 of all crashes in the region. Next slide. Here we have distracted crashes. These are widespread geographically as well, and these only account for 9% of the crashes, but I want to note that's probably highly underrepresented just because it is very difficult a lot of times to catch distracted drivers unless there is an accident, or it's a lot of times hard to make sure that it is reported in the database. So that number is probably very underrepresented. Next slide. And then we have impaired crashes. These occur downtown in urban centers, and these typically occur on your weekend nights, Friday nights and Saturday nights. But it's also interesting to note that we see a little bit of a spike Monday through Thursday during that happy hour time from 4 to 7 p.m. And these only account for 3% of the crashes in the region. Next slide. And what I really want to point out with this one is that, like I said, impaired drivers only make up 3% of crashes in the region, but yet they account for 40% of the fatalities. Next slide. This is just another way that we chose to take a look at crashes. So we divided up the interstates into different corridor geographies. So we looked at the inner ring, middle ring, and outer ring. And if you go to the next slide, this will make more sense. We broke it down for interstate corridor profiles. So you'll notice we have I-65 North, I-65 South, I-24 West, I-24 East, I-40 West, and I-40 East. And then down the left-hand side, we have it broken out into inner, middle, and outer cores. And what this allows you to do is compare interstate corridors across their inner core amongst each other, and as well as the inner, middle, and outer core across the same interstate. So what you'll notice is I-65 South for the middle core had 42,800 crashes as compared to its inner core, which was only 23,000. And then you can compare I-65 South inner core 23,000 to I-24 East inner core. And you can do that same sort of thing for serious injuries as well as fatalities. Next slide. We wanted to make sure to normalize this data by miles of interstate so that the interstates that were shorter in length weren't biased. And what's interesting to note is that I was highlighting I-65 South, the middle core for crashes, but when we normalize it by crashes per mile, we notice that I-24 East really pops up. You have 2,548 crashes per mile. And the same thing happens with serious injuries and fatalities per mile. This starts to get at the severity of the interstate. And then we looked at the percentage of truck crashes that are occurring. And you'll notice I-24 East pops up again, which makes perfect sense with it being the freight corridor and places like that. Next slide. We also wanted to do the same thing with principal arterials because, as we noted through all those maps, that major interstates as well as principal arterials tend to be a problem. We looked at Charlotte Pike, Nolensville Pike, Murfreesboro, all your principal arterials, and then we normalized it by crashes per mile. We also looked at the percentage of crashes that were serious injuries or fatalities. We also looked at the percentage of truck crashes and the percentage of non-motorized crashes. So for Charlotte's Pike, for example, we have 504 crashes per mile, and 1.3% of those resulted in a serious injury or fatality. 2.1% of those were truck crashes, and 1.5% of those were non-motorized. And then to add a little bit of context, we also wanted to get the average speed traveling along that arterial, as well as the transit stops per mile, and then the bicycle and pedestrian percentage of coverage. So that we can see for Charlotte's Pike, for example, 1.5% of crashes were non-motorized, and there was about 50% coverage for bike and ped. Next slide, please. We also wanted to take a look at rates. So we looked at the total number of crashes, but also the crash rate. We did the same for trucks and motorcycles. And then for pedestrians and bicyclists, we just looked at the number of crashes. And here again, you can see on Charlotte Pike, we had 1,620 crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And for trucks, we had 34 truck crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Next slide. Here we zoom into downtown Nashville, where you can see that crashes are heavily concentrated where the interchanges are closely spaced. Next slide. Next slide. We also see the distribution of pedestrian crashes, and they're in the dense urban area and then down near Vanderbilt and West End. Next slide. Then we take you down and zoom into Murfreesboro, and you notice that interchanges also are a big problem, but you can also see that Broad Street lights up between Old Fort Parkway and Main Street. Next slide. And here we see downtown Murfreesboro for pedestrian crashes, and you can see the downtown urban center is a significant hotspot, as well as the Stones River Mall area. Next slide. Here we are showing the top 5% most frequent crash areas in the light pink, and the top 5% most congested corridors or congested links in red. And what this really shows is the relationship between recurring and non-recurring congestion. Some of the same corridors that are experiencing a lot of congestion and other issues are also seeing safety issues. And this is what we'll also be doing when we take a look into the safety profiles for every county, is we'll be looking at those same top crash areas, top congested areas, high rate areas for that specific county. And now I'm gonna turn it back over to Sean.
Thank you, Ashley. That was great. So I think that was a lot of information at the regional level. I think rest assured, we're in the process of putting that material in formats so that you can explore it not only at the county level, but also online to zoom in at a particular downtown center or corridor that is of interest to you. So kind of to wrap up on the safety side of things, I think some of the things that we've noticed and just digging through the data, obviously there's a need to reduce traffic fatalities. We're not headed in the right direction on that front. But I think some of the specific areas that need some more attention than others is one being the downtown interstate loop. This is one of the impetuses for the downtown interstate loop study. But you notice it highlights on almost every single map that we showcase there as a significant need. Also, the need to modernize those major corridors, a lot of those principal arterials, to not only allow safe transportation, but safe access for all users, whether you're traveling in a vehicle or walking or biking on those corridors. And then focus on reducing the non-motorized crashes in and around urban centers, as well as we looked at Murfreesboro and some of you could focus in on some of the other urban centers where we tend to have hot spots for bicycle and pedestrian crashes. And then just reducing crash severity, particularly at intersections where not only for crash severity for vehicles, but also bicyclists and pedestrians that are navigating the intersections throughout the region.
Hey, Sean.
Yes.
Sean, I think you should also look into a possible link between fatalities and vehicular speed. Some of the charts that you guys put out, particularly the one with the inner ring, outer ring, and downtown core or whatever, would again seem to support that where we're more congested, we maybe have more wrecks, but they're not always fatalities, versus when people perceive that they're breaking out of congestion, their speeds heighten, and then if they do wreck because of a blowout or because of a collision or anything else, there may be a higher propensity for that wreck to be severe. I noticed that on the graph that showed in particular, the inner loop, outer loop information. So that may be another finding that you want to look at in terms of what can we do to encourage people not to, once the road looks open, to, put the pedal down.
Yeah, that's a great Tom. Go ahead, Ashley.
So yeah, we've seen that, especially during this whole COVID process, is that even though there's a lot less people on the road, there's a lot more fatalities because people are able to go a lot faster and speed kills. They're just a little bit more random in distribution in terms of where they actually occur. But no, I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, Tom, you are setting us up perfectly for the next item. We've been mentioning some of the COVID impacts and emerging trends, and one that we'd like to add, that we learned about this week, was just that increase in crash severity despite a reduction in the number of crashes. And so, as Ashley mentioned, a big cause of that would be that with less congestion on the roadways, people are able to travel faster. So we have some data that I'll take you through. This is thanks to Patrick Dolan at the Department of Safety. But he released some preliminary information on kind of comparing crash data of what's happened since mid-March, when the travel patterns changed dramatically as a result of COVID, to some of the same time periods over previous years. And I'll just show you a couple of the charts that he shared. And one is that, this one showcasing the number of crashes. Crashes have roughly dropped by about a third, comparing this year to the same time period over the past 5 years, this is statewide data, but just some of the trends to take away. And then looking at crash fatalities, it's a different story where actually fatalities have increased by more than a third, comparing this year, same time period to previous years. And then as we get into looking at non-motorized as well, we've also seen an increase in non-motorized serious injuries and fatalities, kind of utilizing that same comparison. So definitely something to continue to monitor and see how that changes. But I think definitely people being able to travel faster is a major contribution to what we're seeing in the crash severity. And then the last thing I'll plug with safety is just this is an opportunity to utilize the dashboard to explore some of this data in more detail. And I think the dashboard provides an opportunity to not only focus on a certain geography or time of day of week, but you also have the opportunity to overlap, I think, some of these factors and risk factors that we've identified to see kind of what that, how those factors actually, compound or interact with one another. So I encourage you to do that. And then, as Ashley mentioned, we're working on the county profiles as well, so that we can give you information that's useful within your jurisdictions. Any other comments on safety before we jump into overview of the project submissions? All right, well, I'll turn it over to Anna Emerson to give us an update on the call for projects.
Thanks, Sean. Hello, everyone. As Sean said, I'm going to walk you through some statistics related to the requests we received during the call for projects for the Unified Transportation Plan and do some breaking down of what the region is looking to implement over the next 25 years. Sean, thank you. So we received 350 project submissions during the call, and those came from about 30 different local government or agency sponsors across the 7 counties that make up the MPO planning area. All told, the region's wish list at this time totals about $7 billion. And of course, that's in present day value. With inflation factored in, the same request will likely cost around $10 billion total to implement in the years in which the sponsors are estimating they will actually be expending this funding. It's also definitely worth mentioning here that this list does not yet include the larger items we've discussed as a region in recent years, such as some of the big regional corridor or downtown interstate projects that are contained in the current long-range plan. And when we add those to the list, it will significantly increase the total cost of all the needs. Do the next slide. Thank you. Staff has given each project request submitted a label to define its project type that looks to the main objective of each project. And we've broken down that on this slide. By far, our largest category includes new roadway infrastructure and widening requests, with roadway modernization and maintenance coming in at a distant second. That roadway modernization category also includes items like sidewalk projects, and then that's followed by intersection and interchange improvement projects, many of which focus on safety and operational improvements and public transportation related investments. Next slide. This slide depicts the 3 major time horizons in which sponsors indicated they would intend to implement projects submitted for the plan. Considerations that might affect a local agency's decision-making here would include things like whether that local agency would expect to have required local matching funds for the project available, when they might have the time and resources to pursue a given project, and of course, any other projects they may have underway that a requested project would be affected by or dependent upon. So here we have in the dark blue projects in the 2025 or short-term horizon, many of which are already funded in one way or another currently and are possibly even already underway. In the orange, we have the 2035 or midterm horizon, which is also our most popular time frame. And then in the light blue is the 2045 or long-term horizon, which is our most expensive horizon, if you will. A lot of projects in that horizon group are some of our bigger ticket items, things we know we need to address or would like to address at some point, but in many cases we're just unsure how we would fund or implement those things in the near term. And next slide. This graph shows the distribution of the number of project requests by county. So that's the number of projects and not the dollar amount of those projects. And this is just projects that were submitted that are within that county, not as the county itself as a sponsor. As you can see, we received the most requests from Wilson County and agencies in Wilson County, followed by Davidson and Sumner. I think that's likely reflective of the growth those counties have seen in recent years. We also have some multi-county and regional requests where you're likely to see projects that address things like transit in our regional commuter corridors. And next slide. This slide is showing the various cost ranges of project submissions we received. These costs are estimated by the sponsor applying for the project, and they're in present day value, so this does not represent the potential for inflation. The majority of projects being requested are projected to cost less than $10 million, with the 10 to 25 million range following that. We do have 8 $100 million plus project requests in the region, and those include a variety of things ranging from major overhauls to existing corridors to new roadways to public transportation related improvements. And next slide. So as staff continues to organize and cull through these project submissions, our next major step is going to be that we will begin to meet with all of you on a county by county basis to discuss and refine the applications and to review our evaluation methodology and regional prioritization process. You'll get to take a look at the preliminary evaluation results for your projects, and we'll be able to discuss together any changes to project scope that may result from that analysis. And then finally, we'll sort of fine-tune things as they relate to project costs and scheduling, and we'll get some feedback from you regarding local prioritization of projects in the hope that we can work toward a fiscally constrained project list that reflects those priorities that you indicate. And next. So in order to get the first of these meetings scheduled, we're asking that the county TCC representative for each county sort of take the lead here and coordinate with the municipalities and transit agencies within your county in order to identify which of the dates listed here are good for your group's availability. You know, for example, this would be Tom taking the lead for all the agencies in Wilson County to help us kind of coordinate when we can pull everyone together. We'll meet online just as we're doing now, and meetings will take place from 10 a.m. to noon on whichever of these dates we can identify as best for members within each county. So that's it for the update on the long-range planning activities.
Any questions related to that?
Sean, this is Josh Sudduth. Can you guys send those dates out to us as soon as you can?
Yeah, we'll send those around, and you know, we can help to coordinate that as well. We just wanted to get some dates out there, and you know, hopefully we can get as many folks as we can into those windows. But we'll definitely send those dates around. All right, just a couple of other items to mention before we let you go. Just some updates on ongoing studies for the inner loop. We're continuing to meet with stakeholders on that. I think, as we mentioned back with the update of the RTP schedule, is that you know, a lot of these study efforts are still going to continue and move forward. It's just the schedule for them is not as urgent, given that they're not going to be major components into the 2045 RTP. You know, with that said, we're still working through with stakeholders, coordinating on inner loop work. Haven't scheduled any community engagement efforts yet, but you can find some additional information on that study at the Solve This Together. And then South Corridor is continuing to move forward. We had a follow-up meeting to the state steering and technical committee meeting on May 21st. That follow-up meeting was on June 9th, where we covered some additional details on the study. You can find those deliverables and updated materials on the South Corridor file share, that GNRC.org South Corridor files, and that you can review some of the project updates and a review of some of the alternatives that are being proposed, as well as the cost estimates there. As I mentioned, we have the dashboards available, GNRC.org dashboards, where a lot of the information that we've presented on traffic congestion or crashes, you can dig into a little bit more detail through these dashboards and focus on your particular jurisdiction or a particular corridor, but just know that those are available for you. Just a quick update on the Unified Planning Work Program. So we had the initial presentation to you all last month. I think just a update would be that we'll push this, the adoption of the UPWP to next month's meeting. And so at the August 5th meeting, we'll have that final presentation to the TCC before the adoption by the Transportation Policy Board at the August 19th meeting. And then last thing I wanted to plug is just the TDOT grant opportunities that Melanie had mentioned at last month's meeting. One being the multimodal access grant. They're seeking the notice of intent on the multimodal access grant by the end of July. So get those in if you're interested. You can find more information at this link on TDOT's website. And then the other being the Transportation Alternatives Program, which those applications I believe are open through October. And you can find more information on that program at the link on TDOT's website as well. So I think that's all we had to cover. Is there any questions that we can answer before you continue with your day?
Sean, I'll just remind everybody to visit gnrc.org/CMP file share for the latest on those efforts.
Well, we appreciate you guys taking the time today. We will be, following up with the additional materials and look forward to the documentation and the safety policy brief of a lot of the information that Ashley covered today. We'll also be, following up with some of those additional county level profiles so that you all can see this information at a different sub area analysis as well. But thank you for taking the time today, and reach out if you have any questions. We'll be available.
Thanks, guys.